we had Emory on, or maybe I had him on my personal
I think
channel
you
this
did.
time last year leading up to the draft. We thought we would bring him inside the vault for this special occasion as we're now under 3 weeks away from the draft. We know what the Ravens' needs are. We know what their objectives are, we think. And Emory is going to help us dive into all that and more. You can follow him on Twitter, YouTube, Football Game Plan. This guy knows it all. And his niche is those maybe under the radar small town college prospects, which of course we'll get into him with. But here he is on social media, Twitter, X at FBall Game Plan. That's Football Game Plan. Let's bring him in now. He and I, Sarah, used to do shows together down in the DC area, and it's great to have you back on, brother. Thanks so much for coming. How are things going?
Things are going great, man. I finished that draft guide, so now I'm free to talk prospects, and I'm excited because I now get to sleep a little bit more. But definitely amped to talk draft talk, and I appreciate y'all bringing me on.
Oh, this is great. Well, I'm just happy to meet you for the first time. Bobby has been singing your praises, saying that, you guys worked well together and you know your stuff. So can you just kind of take us like a big picture in your view as we head into the 2024 NFL draft? Where do you feel like the strengths and weaknesses are kind of position wise in this draft?
Well, everyone's talked about this, but it is very true. It's a deep receiver class. And when I say deep, I'm talking about it's elite at the top and it's elite in the middle. So you can
Ooh.
find starters deep in the first round, into the second round, maybe at the top of the third, guys that can contribute right away as rookies. And there's also deep and, rather lengthy at tackle as well. So if you need an offensive tackle, you can find help there. And because I grade so many prospects, I always see the positives in every draft class. So when people say it's not a deep safety class, I disagree. There's just a little bit more versatility at safety, guys that can do both, which is kind of what you want anyway. So I do think every draft class is deep. When you go as deep as I do, it kind of helps you broaden your scope. So you can find those Keaton Mitchells, you can find those Deonte Hardys, all throughout the draft. And the Ravens are one of the few teams that understand that, which is why I always feel like they ace the draft every year, and that includes their picks and also their undrafted free agents.
Is there a specific guy or guys plural that you would just adore for them at 30 that come to mind?
Any receiver. If one of these top receivers are there, take them. If
Oh
one of these
yeah.
top corners are there, take them. And here's the thing, too. You talk about pass rusher now. I thought that was a fantastic point you guys made. With what's going to happen potentially at the top, we expect three quarterbacks to go 1, 2, 3. But whoever takes the first receiver or first tackle, you could probably expect a run on that position because of the elite talent. Everyone's going to be afraid that their guy won't be there. So let's say if the Chargers or the Cardinals take a quarter receiver at 4, expect a lot of receivers to come off the board. If they decide to go tackle, expect a lot of tackles to come off the board. And all of that to say, we're probably going to see some talented defensive players get pushed down the board. So you may be there at pick 30, and a guy like Jarrett Verse may be there, or Liatu Latu out of UCLA may be there. Those are the things you kind of can expect when you have elite talent in certain positions that people deem as key positions. You're going to expect to run on quarterbacks, probably receivers, and probably tackles, which pushes a lot of defensive quality talent down to where the Ravens are.
Okay, so a follow-up question on this is I'm like putting on my GM hat here. So if there's elite talent, okay, you said both wide receiver and offensive line depth is in this draft. But would you also say that the depth is because you said the depth for wide receiver is elite in the middle? Would you still say the offensive line depth? And I want to talk tackle specifically. Would you say offensive tackle is still elite depth?
I would say after maybe judging by how I graded these tackles this year, maybe after the 7th tackle, you'll
Mm-hmm.
start to see a little bit of, okay, these guys are kind of, you know, solid players as opposed to guys that you feel like can be pro bowlers. So maybe after the 5th tackle is taken in the first round, you're probably going to pass on tackle,
Okay.
and wait till get one of these guys that can be a quality, reserve tackle, swing tackle with a trajectory to start maybe in year 2 or 3. But at receiver, I feel like with the way the passing game is, you can find guys that can start right away. Because remember, starting receiver is not just the outside guys. You got inside guys. You got guys that can serve a specific role, but end up playing a lot of snaps for you that you would technically classify as a starter. But at tackle, it's unique. And I think you can, if push came to shove, you have to really look at, okay, how deep is defensive end or edge rusher? It's probably not as deep as tackle. So we probably have to take the guy we like here as opposed to taking a guy that we see as a starter in 2 or 3 years down the line right there at tackle.
Emory, speaking of tackles, it was reported that the Ravens took a look at Troy Fautanu for a top 30 visit. I think it was yesterday or earlier this week. He's the left tackle for Washington. What are your thoughts on him grading wise?
He was my number one tackle in the class. And here's the thing. People will bring up his height. He's 6'3", 317. But this is what I say. Just trust what you see on film. And when you watch his tape, you're watching him in the Pac-12, Power 5 conference. You're watching him against, Leatu Latu. You're watching him against that Oregon State defensive front. You're watching him against Dorless and company out there at Oregon. You're watching him against USC and the speed that they bring off the edge. So you're watching him compete at tackle at the highest of levels and do it insanely well. You watched him against Texas. You watched him against Michigan. As long as he's holding his own out there at the position, leave him at the position, right? Let him play tackle where he's excelled all throughout his career. Now, if he starts to struggle consistently at tackle, then you can have the conversation of moving him to guard. But for me, he's the best tackle in the class because he's athletic. And when you're athletic, you get out on the move, you're able to expand your run game east and west. So you're able to do a lot of things when you have the athleticism at tackle, especially left tackle, because teams genuinely want to run right-handed, but now you're able to run weak side a lot because you can trust that guy to get out there and get to the second level or get that defensive end hook. Man, it just opens up your entire playbook.
So our listeners know my dream scenario would be able to take a tackle and perhaps right tackle this year and maybe left tackle of the future, depending on how Ronnie Stanley holds up. And then because of that elite depth at wide receiver, I'd like them to revisit wide receiver in the 2nd or 3rd round. So with that being said, could you give me 2 names at the end of the 1st round that could potentially be there of a tackle that you think that's a great pick? And then maybe follow that up with 2 or so names of wide receivers at the end of the 2nd round that could be there.
Well, it's always hard to predict the draft because if you'd have asked me this in 2018, I would have told you Lamar Jackson would have gone 4th at worst. But here we are, right? So with that being said, I do look at the Ravens and how they draft. They really don't care where a guy plays. They just want the talent. So with all of that being the backdrop, I'm looking at Yale's offensive tackle, Kieran Amagaji, 6'5", 328. Long arms, athletic. I always tell people go watch the Morgan State game because Morgan State next year will have a guy up front, Elijah Williams, who wears number 0. He's going to be a draft pick. He was a phenomenal defensive lineman. This year, they have a guy in Noah Washington who's going to be on an NFL roster at 6'4", 275 that can play across the front, even as an outside edge. And Amagaji gave those guys a business all throughout that ball game. So I like that he's able to match up athletically, match up with his technique, and was consistent all throughout his time at Yale. And here's the thing, too. He didn't participate in the postseason All-Star game process because he was nursing an injury. But when he's healthy and 100%, he is one of the top tackles, regardless of subdivision, in the class. I know Fuaga out of Oregon State may be another name that people float around that could potentially still be there. I still feel like he's an elite player at tackle at this juncture of the draft, so I would definitely love to take him as well. As far as receivers, no one's talking enough about Jermaine Burton out of Alabama by way of Georgia. He is explosive. He is dynamic after the catch. He could be a catch and run guy. He could be a vertical threat type guy. Reminds me a lot of what Odell Beckham brought to the table at LSU. So when you're thinking of a young Odell Beckham, I think Burton has that same build, that same level of explosiveness, and that same dynamic playmaking ability. And if Keon Coleman is there, take Keon Coleman because he's a taller receiver. People love to focus on the wrong things. They bring up his speed, but they don't bring up, okay, at the combine when he ran the gauntlet drill, he had the fastest GPS time, which tells you he trusts his hands, and he was running the gauntlet in the straight line. You see receivers tend to weave all wrong, try to make sure they catch the ball. Like he was straight line and had the fastest time, which tells you he trusts his hands. He understands game speed, so he's playing fast, and he returned punts. You don't see tall guys return punts. But that tells you a lot about his footwork, which tells you a lot about his quickness and his release off the line of scrimmage, which he excels at. And we know he can go above the rim and make the big plays in the passing game. So it reminds me a lot of what Keenan Allen was when he came out of Cal, another tall receiver that people deemed slow, but he was another one that returned punts at Cal. And we know about his releases off the line of scrimmage and his ability to win within the route and also after the catch.
Emory, just in terms of like the skill sets, the measurables, when you look at these wide receivers and when you look at what is already in Baltimore's room, tight ends aside, if you're Eric DeCosta, are you looking for a specific type? Meaning, like, there's some talk out there that there's a lot of similarities between, I don't know, a Xavier Worthy and a Zay Flowers, or a Lad McConkey and a Zay Flowers. Not in terms of maybe play, but just what they measurable wise, right? Do you think that mirroring that type of player to Zay, would there be any type of disadvantage there versus going to get your traditional X?
When it's week 9 and we're out watching football games, right? And you say you're watching the Miami Dolphins, do you care that both Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are 5'10"? No one cares, right? No one cares. Oh, this guy is no, you just care if they're good. So if you find good receivers, no one, and people just started watching football, I feel like in 2010, because they forget, things like the Smurfs. They forget the Three Amigos. They forget that Cincinnati in the division has 3 tall wide receivers. It doesn't matter the height differential across the board. As long as these dudes can play, get you some good receivers, and everything else will fall into place. So you talk to someone that lives by the motto, size is not a skill. If you're good enough, you're big enough, i.e. Keaton Mitchell last year, whenever I was tripping out he's 179. Like, bro, you got to catch the 179 first to tackle the 179. I don't care. So if you feel like Xavier Worthy, who's a fantastic receiver, by the way, is doubling up the efforts on Zay Flowers, so be it. There's no downside to having 2 Zay Flowers out there. You want elite players out there on the field. That's the name of the game.
Emory, I don't know if you're looking at the comments to the side, but people are telling you to preach right now. They're feeling what you're preaching right now. I love it. One last thing on wide receiver, just because I've kind of liked him. Can you give me your scattering report on Xavier Legette?
Listen, he is so underrated. I have him as one of my top 5 X receivers because I do feel like he can play on the boundary. And he is someone that's a dynamic player after the catch. And had South Carolina had better protection along the offensive line, then we know Spencer Rattler would have found him a lot in that during the season. So he is someone, he's 6'1", about 225, a physical player, explosive player, and someone that can help you win underneath. He's a great rack guy. I feel like that's an underrated aspect that people don't take enough, significance in terms of looking at these receivers. How can you win in a pro game? You don't have time to, 7-step drop and wait for somebody to get deep down the field. You better be able to create your own shot, so to speak. And a lot of these receivers in this draft class, Legette being one of them, can catch a short pass and weave his way through traffic like a New York cab and get to the end zone. So I like the fact that a lot of these guys are saying similar skill sets in terms of the explosiveness, the playmaking ability, the rack ability. And yeah, Legette is one of my favorites in this class.
Emory, you mentioned the projected drop off for tackles in your estimation. What's the equivalent for pass rush?
There's maybe 4 guys that you could say, okay, these are 1st-round guys, right? And then everyone else after that would be kind of, okay, he does this well, maybe this not well. So the guys that I think are legit 1st-round, bar none type guys are your Leatu Latu, your Dallas Turner, your Jared Verse. I'm a big Jonah Ellis guy out of Utah. I feel like he's my number 1 edge rusher. Now I grade them by 4.3 in, 3.4 in edge rushers. So when people hear that, they think, oh wow, he doesn't like, Latu or Verse. I just have those guys graded differently. I feel like Latu and Verse are 4.3 type defensive end pass rush that could also play the run rather well. These edge rushers are what I'm speaking of edge guys. I'm talking about guys that could just straight go and get the quarterback. So everyone after that, you're thinking of like hired weapons. Like Mo Kamara out of Colorado State. I felt like his tape was in 2 times fast forward because he was just so explosive off the ball, and he was already at the ear hole of the offensive lineman by the time they got out their stance, and it was in the backfield. So dudes like that are all throughout this draft. So if you want some, situational rush guys, there's a bunch of those, but guys that you can trust down in, down out to be out there as a starter, there's really like 3 to 4, maybe 5 depending on how you grade him in this class.
So we've focused a lot on tackle so far, but obviously the Ravens just lost their 2 starting guards on both sides, and there's some in-house guys. But I don't know if you heard this, but Daniel Jeremiah recently did a local interview, and he had predicted the Ravens will take 3 offensive linemen this draft. And so, they do have need at guard. Can you give us some guards, maybe some mid-round guards that we should look into that could maybe fit the Ravens and what they do?
I will like my top guard in the class is Javion Cohen out of Miami. I just love the fact that he's super physical, has strong hands. He's able to get control of defensive linemen and move them out the way. He's not as athletic, or he's super athletic, but he's not as athletic. It's funny because my number 2 guard is Cooper Beebe out of Kansas State. And Kansas State is one of those sight unseen type players, schools where if you told me, oh, we're going to take this K-State offensive lineman, I don't have to watch the tape, but know he's going to be good. Like a Utah defensive player, I'm good on those. They're going to be good, right? So BB is funny because BB is not as athletic as Cohen, but he gets out on the move a little bit better than Cohen, despite Cohen being a better athlete. But Cohen is super strong. He's functionally strong. BB is someone that makes great contact, and a lot of times that's all you really need, to be honest. Just make contact, getting away for about 2 seconds, and then the play is past you. So those are 2 really good guards. Listen, I know people. I don't know if big tackle propaganda has gotten to people because they've done a fantastic job in the football mindset and thinking that you need a left tackle, you need a right tackle. Like really, what you need is guard center guard to be outstanding. Because if you have us 3 at tackle, if your quarterback is worth their salt, they can step up in the pocket and make a play. You can't step up if your guard center guard is terrible. So you better have elite play right there in the middle. The closer you are to the ball, the more important your position is. So I think you invest heavily in the guard, center guard, D tackle, Mike backer, free safety, quarterback, running back, and you straight down the battery. If you're strong there, you're going to be good everywhere else. So I think if they do invest heavily in the guard position, this is another class where you can get depth across the board along the interior offensive line.
Hey, real quick, sorry, Bobby, to cut you off. Just want to do one more on guards. Andrew Voorhees, the Ravens traded back in the 7th round last year to pick him up. What was his projection last year? Like what round, and what do you think that Ravens are saying he's healthy. He's going to be ready to go. Voluntary OTAs, day 1. What we don't know we don't know. We haven't seen him all year. What would you say about him and what the Ravens are getting in him?
They're getting someone that's solid on the move. Athleticism is key within this Ravens offense, and that goes across the OCs that they've had over during Lamar Jackson's tenure, right? So these are when you're getting guys that have the requisite size and also athletic ability. Now you're combining 2 legit strengths into one, because you can have big, but you want fast. And sometimes they don't kind of go together. If you're gonna get fast, you're gonna sacrifice size. If you're gonna go size, you're gonna sacrifice speed. But they're getting a good mix of both athleticism and size combined. So therefore, that's why they wanted to grab his services. And they're seeing guys that are like on the cusp that okay, he has traits that we like, so we bring him in, we develop him, and then we throw him out there as a either reserve or a starter. And that's how they've done, which is why they've been solid across the board for the most part during Lamar Jackson's tenure there. Obviously, he helps out a lot because he's Lamar Jackson. So, he's not going to sit around and let you just tackle him and sack him. So, but they got traits that they look for. And Voorhees is someone I think combines has that good combination of both size and athleticism.
Do you think he would have, what round do you think he would have gone in if he hadn't gotten injured last year?
Probably would have gone somewhere day 2. Probably would have gone somewhere day 2. And you hate that, but I love the fact that the Ravens, and remember San Francisco used to do this too for a while. I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, where they would draft guys and redshirt them that were injured. And and on the other side of it, yes, sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. But you want to secure the rights in case it does work out, because you got a free lottery ticket. You got a guy that was projected to go day 2, early day 2. You got him for free, essentially, as a 7th-round pick. And now you still have, this is the financial part of it. You get him cheaply, and now you got a cheap starter. But at some point, obviously going to have to pay him if he's as good as you expect him to be pre-injury. So I think they lucked out.
We're joined by Emory Hunt right now. Little Friday lunch hour live stream for you. You can follow Emory on Twitter at Football Game Plan. That's FBall Game Plan. You can check out his work on YouTube, X, and pretty much every other platform out there, as well as CBS Sports HQ and a number of other things as we get ready for the NFL draft. Emory, is there a scenario that comes to mind that, based on how the board shakes out, would maybe entice the Ravens to move back?
If some of these, elite talents at receiver or edge rusher are not there, and then all right, well, we can, acquire more mid-round picks, because the Ravens do a good job anyway within the mid-rounds, I feel like. So they can kind of slide back, or if there's one specific guy they want and they're getting good intel that maybe at the top of the second round, other teams are having the same thought, they'll just take him right there at 30. But I feel like they can, slide back and just, recruit more Ravens type picks in the middle of the draft and be successful. Because again, at the end of the day, they are one of the few teams. It's like 5 teams, I feel like, that just is almost like they put their card in before the draft, because teams will just bypass these players, right, wrong, and different, and they just land in the right spots, right? Like how many times we talked about pre-draft that Najee Harris just looks like a Steeler, and he ends up getting drafted by Pittsburgh, because probably Pittsburgh turned the card in already. Like, just let the draft go, and we're just going to get our guy. Ravens do the same thing. And so they just kind of, guys that you kind of look at like, yeah, that's a Raven. He ends up being a Raven. I don't know how. I don't know if they, saying whatever backdoor channels they have to game the draft, but guys that end up being what they're supposed to be only tend to happen to certain teams, and the Ravens are one of them.
All right, I got a scenario for you that I put out on Twitter yesterday. I'm going to tweak it a little bit. And this is doubtful all these guys will be there at 30, but I just want to kind of see where you rank them. And there's no trade back here. There's no trade. So if Tyler Guyton, Chop Robinson, Cooper DeJean, and Adonai Mitchell are on the board, you cannot trade back.
Give me Mitchell. Give me Mitchell.
You want Mitchell?
Give me Mitchell. And here's why. Mitchell is a taller, maybe he's about the same size or height, but he reminds me so much of CD Lamb. He's a lean guy, tall guy that can play outside, but also can play inside because he's a savvy route runner and does a good job of being able to run after the catch. He's a catch and run guy. People underestimate that about him. And some people will say, oh, what about his production? He just wasn't productive enough at Texas. Like, the big elephant in the room is the quarterback wasn't good. So, I mean, you take his skill set and you add a 2-time MVP, and you add him as, maybe the second or third option in a passing attack, he's going to eat. So, and here's the thing, as much as defense wins championships, totally agree. You know what I'm saying? But you got to score. If I outscore you, you're going to lose. So I like points. And so I'm going to go, that was an easy one. 80 Mitchell is the one I'm taking.
Woo-hoo. He said that was easy.
There was zero hesitation.
I like it.
Zero hesitation. All right, what do you say we do this, Sarah? We open it up to some questions, but before we do, we ask him about his bread and butter. Before we do anything.
Yeah, we were noticing that you do a lot of small school prospect kind of drafts. Is that your bread and butter, just the small school guys?
Listen, I'm a football guy, right? So,
okay.
And here's my story. Like, I jump into the draft because during the fall football season, I say fall football season because I also cover the UFL, the European League of Football, the CFL. So I'm football all year round. So the fall football season, I am calling games on Saturday, college games. I do a pregame show on CBS Sports HQ on Thursday nights for pregame and postgame NFL. So I'm covering NFL and college all throughout the season. I don't jump into the draft until January when I travel to all 9 All-Star games and do my scouting work, put together this large draft guide that I put out. And so within that, from January to March 28th, when I'm done with the draft guide, I'm pouring in scouting and just grading prospects. So all the guys that I've seen at the different All-Star games and guys that I've seen from the games that I called during the season are going into this draft guide. I know a lot of people that cover the draft all year round, and they say, here's my top 150. Like, wait, you mean for 12 months you've only been able to talk about top? It's easy to look at Ohio State and say, yeah, that guy's pretty good. Like, yeah, duh, he's at Ohio State. Like, the key is to look at the kid at Morgan State and say, that's an NFL player. And so that's why I just include everybody in my draft talk. So it may give the perception
Okay.
that, oh, he's a small school guy. Like, now I'm a draft guy, and these dudes that play at a lot of, everybody can't play in the ACC, right? So there's talent everywhere. And if you see talent, you just got to document the talent and put it in the draft guide.
All right, so here's the question, because the Ravens, like, I'm thinking of Matthew Judon, Grand Valley State, Brennan Williams. Where did he come from? I can't remember.
Pat
Ravens
Ricard
take,
came from Maine.
yeah,
You
lots.
go on
The
and on.
Ravens take pride. So can you give us somebody not on our radar, because you're, like you said, it's not Ohio State, it's not Alabama. Who are some small school guys that it's like you should watch out for these?
I'm glad you asked that question. I have a bevy of guys, right? All right.
Okay.
Let's keep it in line with the needs, right? So wide receiver, there's two that immediately jump out at me right off the bat. Kyle Sheets of Slippery Rock, Division II program. They tend to churn out prospects. Sheets is 6'2", 222, runs a high 4.4, low 4.5, but can get vertical down the field. He stood out the College Gridiron Showcase when I was down there in January, just baking FBS, FCS corner. So now you already seen, okay, he could win versus top talent, consistently doing it. He could play inside or outside. John Giles of West Florida, 6'2", 202, insane leaping ability for someone that tall. And he's another one that was at the Gridiron Showcase, killing defensive backs. And then he gets a call up to the Hula Bowl the following week, a late call up, and was able to go down there versus consistent FBS corners and do great things there. Defensive end edge rusher, A.J. Simon of UAlbany, the Great Danes, right? This is a team that just consistently put out front edge talent. We saw Jared Verse leave UAlbany to go to Florida State. A.J. Simon came in and was playing well there and consistently. You go back and watch his game versus Hawaii. He was giving those guys the blues. He was in the backfield consistently. He had a really good Hula Bowl as well. And you also look at on the back end, I got to stay local for you guys in Baltimore. Javion Morton and Jordan Tolles. Jordan Tolles, the safety out of Morgan State, played at LSU, transferred to Morgan State. Guy that can play free safety or even down in the, kind of like that Kyle Hamilton role. He's a very good open field tackler. And Javion Morton, I joked all throughout his career, he was on the all Emory Hunt team. It was like 4 dudes on it, right? I never was able to finish the whole roster. But it was just the fact that every time they needed a big play, turning the ball over, number 22 in the slot was just turning the ball over consistently. Forget the size. He's 5'8", about 180, ran 4.5, but he has elite level instincts and ball awareness. If the ball is late and errant coming his way, best believe he's going to find a way to turn it the other and go back the opposite way. So there is a ton of small school talent out there, and those guys just immediately jumped out at me because those are the dudes that kind of you remember. And you're watching these guys, and you're like, okay, that's an NFL play. And because I'm always at like Giants training camp or Jets training camp out here where I'm at, you see what works consistently. You see what pro level athleticism is. And so what translate, whether it's coming from Slippery Rock, whether it's coming from, West Florida, whether it's coming from Frostburg State, it doesn't matter. These are kids that can get out there and play. And I think those guys are some names to keep an eye on.
Man, you're pulling at my heartstrings here, right? You got my hometown, Albany Great Danes. Thank you for mentioning them, the 518. And then you still doing Morgan State commentary in the fall?
Yeah, I just pulled out, like I did the Morgan State Albany game. So if you want to go back and watch the broadcast in the torrential downpour that went to overtime, you'll hear me talking about both guys out there. And one guy ended up, Anton Kunjaj is another one, defensive end, but he transferred out of UAlbany. He got took some G5 offer, but there's a bunch of talent out there, man. And the reason why is because guys want to get out there and play. Gone are the days where guys can go to Florida State and just stockpile their depth chart and never play. Man, I want to go start somewhere. So you go and start, and then problem is now you go there and start, you ball out, then you get called back to that Florida State and you go out there and play as well. So there's a ton of talent, whether it's FCS, D2, there's guys. Here's one for the archives. Antonio Elfano. Now, the name sounds familiar. He was the number 1 recruit in the country. I want to say 2019 class, 2020 class. Signed with Alabama, went to practice with Alabama for the summer, and then left the team. And then the infamous Nick Saban comes out and says, like, oh, he quit. That kid, So that dude bounced around. He went to Penn State for a practice or two. Then he ended up, sitting out for a year or whatnot. Ends up at Lackawanna Community College. And when you have #1 overall recruit in the country, athleticism and size at 6'5", 270, and you're playing at Lackawanna, you know what that tape looks like. That is like insane how unblockable he was. And so now he's gotten his life together, gotten his head straight. He has some things that happen off the field personally for him, which contributed to him leaving the program. But now he's mentally where he needs to be. And he's still 6'5", 275. He's still insane athletically. And he's someone that won't get drafted, but he's going to be a priority free agent. Someone's going to stash him on their practice squad. They're going to have an elite level defensive line prospect for essentially nothing, because this dude's tape at Lackawanna was just nuts. So he still has the football skill. He still has the athleticism. And I feel like that's someone even if he gets called on day 3, people are like, well, who the hell is that? Well, that's who that kid is. And so, yeah, that's the one you kind of want.
And we got over right around 2,000 concurrents right now, and they're loving the under the radar analysis that you're bringing right now.
There's so many questions coming in.
Truth bearers all over. This we got to give Truth Bearers comment a little bit of love here. This is Mel Kiper 2.0, walking encyclopedia for even smaller schools. That's right. And like you said, this guy's watching Morgan State football every single Saturday, just about in the fall. So you nailed Baltimore, you nailed my hometown in Albany. We got to get some Columbus love out there. Well, we got Ohio State out there for Sarah. Sarah's in Columbus. Somebody just asked about Frostburg. Eileen Nolan wanted to know if there's anybody that's ever been out of her hometown of Frostburg State. We won't put you on the spot.
Well, I will say this: the kid that would have came out from Frostburg State transferred to Maryland, and so
Gottlieb. He knew though he had an answer. This is crazy.
the tackle Gottlieb Okoye, Ayende, I think his last name is. He played in the East-West Shrine Bowl, but he was going to come out last year and play in the Senior Bowl at out of Frostburg State, but he took the extra year to go back to play at the Power 5 level, went to Maryland, and someone that could play guard and or tackle. So there you go.
Hey, you're also getting Mark Ingram lookalike comments. You got a doppelganger out there.
Time out. I'll tell you a quick funny story. I get that a lot. I remember I was scouting at and this is funny because I was scouting at Villanova. So you kind of know where I'm going. So I'm there. It was a Villanova Lehigh game, and it was this older guy that just kind of like. So I'm at the food station getting some food, and the guy came up. He was like, "Man, I appreciate you coming out and always coming back." I'm like, "Oh, I love coming to Villanova. It's one of my favorite spots because it's they got good talent." He's like, "That's always good. When you're able to come back and just." And I'm thinking like, wait a minute. And so now it's starting to register. I'm like, damn, we about the same height. We both play running back. He think I'm damn Brian Westbrook. And so, when he realized it, he was like, damn, I can't walk it back now. So we kind of both silently realized, I'm not who you think I am. He's like, dang, he's not who I thought he was.
But hey, thanks for coming out anyway, Em.
He just kind of like quietly walked back and went the other way. But that's funny though. But yeah, I get that a lot, man.
Yeah, when next time somebody mistakes you, you should just pull out, "Come see me at the bank."
Right. Well, listen, in college, what we used to do, you can't do this now because everybody got phones and Google and stuff like that. But we used to tell people we play baseball, and because nobody checked for baseball, right? Nobody, so we used to go to places and go get in nightclubs and stuff free, telling people, we play for the Brewers. Right? Nobody checked who the hell play baseball. Now you can't even lie like that now because somebody will pull up their phone right now.
Oh yeah,
like, man, it's not Mark Ingram. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, those days are gone.